aside from basic talent, what's the most important ingredient that you have in your head as you move along in the entertainment business? What else must you have?
You must have a will to keep going.
Bobby Womack died with a terrible secret. On the surface, he was a soul legend, a man whose music shaped generations. But behind the soulful voice and legendary career was a man whose life was filled with betrayal, addiction, and secrets that even his biggest fans never knew.
You want to understand why he made the choices he made. It's not just like an open and closed book. You're curious as to what he was thinking when he married Barbara.
From shocking affairs to devastating scandals, the truth about Bobby Womack's personal life is far darker than the music industry ever let on. So, let's get into it. Barbara Campbell Cook was already a broken woman when Bobby Womack entered her life. At 29, she had endured the tragic drowning of her 18-month-old son, Vincent, in the family pool just a year before, and then suffered the shocking murder of her husband, Sam Cooke, in a seedy Los Angeles motel in December 1964. The circumstances of Sam's death were murky and controversial, leaving Barbara not only grieving but humiliated by the tawdry nature of his demise. Barbara would tell one of Cook's biographers, Peter Guralnick, that the baby's death and the way her husband died made her vulnerable to the advances of the 19-year-old Womack.
Sam Cooke was like a big brother to Bobby because Bobby was around him more.
It went beyond mentorship. Bobby got to see how a real star lived with a big house. He got to cruise with Sam Cooke.
When the young guitarist showed up to console her, she saw him as a protector, someone who could help shield her and her children from the world's judgment. What she got instead was perhaps the greatest betrayal of her life. Just 3 months after Sam Cooke's death, Bobby Womack married Barbara Campbell Cook on March 5, 1965. The day after Bobby's 21st birthday. The optics were devastating. Bobby showed up to Cook's funeral with Barbara and dressed in one of Cook's suits. He also came to the funeral service driving Cook's car. The music community was outraged. According to the New York Times, Womack and Cook received plenty of hate mail, including a package with a baby doll in a coffin. But the public humiliation was nothing compared to what Barbara would endure privately. The marriage quickly became a nightmare of suspicion, arguments, and Bobby's obvious inability to remain faithful. Barbara, 10 years older than Bobby and already emotionally fragile, found herself trapped in a relationship with a man who seemed incapable of loyalty or respect. She had lost her son, her husband, and now her dignity was being stripped away by the very person who had promised to protect her.
I was so crazy about Sam that the first thing that I said, I'm gonna protect his family.
The breaking point came in 1970, 6 years into their marriage. Barbara found him in bed with her 18-year-old daughter, Linda Cook. Linda is the eldest child of Barbara Campbell and Sam Cooke, born on April 25, 1953. When her father was murdered in December 1964, she was just 11 years old, a vulnerable child who had already lost the most important man in her life. Soon after, her mother married Cook's protege, Bobby Womack. Bobby became Linda's stepfather when she was barely 12, stepping into a role that should have provided stability and protection for a grieving child. Instead, he would become her predator. Even Cook's father was upset, and reportedly was especially concerned that Womack would be around the late singer's daughter, Linda, who was then 11. These concerns would prove to be tragically prophetic. As Linda entered her teenage years, Bobby began grooming her for an actual relationship. The power dynamics were sickening. He was her stepfather, a grown man in his mid-20s, while she was a teenager who had never recovered from losing her father. In 1970, Barbara shot at him after she discovered he was having sex with Linda, who was 17 years old at the time. The affair had likely been going on for some time before Barbara discovered it. Bobby was 25 years old, Linda was 17, but the relationship had clearly developed over years while she was even younger and more vulnerable. The psychological damage to Linda was immense. According to Bobby Womack, Linda never spoke to her mother again after that incident. The affair had not only violated Linda's innocence, but had completely destroyed her relationship with her mother. Barbara, already devastated by losing her husband and son, now lost her daughter as well. Linda blamed her mother for the situation, unable to see that she had been manipulated and victimized by Bobby. The relationship between Bobby and Linda didn't last long after the shooting. In 1972, Linda co-wrote Bobby Womack's 1972 hit song, Woman's Gotta Have It, suggesting she continued to have some professional relationship with him even after their relationship ended.
I don't care how you look at it, fellas, a woman's got to have it.
Anyway, Regina Banks represented Bobby Womack's attempt at a fresh start, but even this relationship began with troubling power imbalances that would define their tumultuous marriage. The late music superstar was then 31 when he met Banks, who was in her late teens. Like Linda Cook before her, Regina was a teenager when she became involved with the much older Bobby. In a 1976 interview with Jet magazine, Womack said he was on board his Rolls-Royce when he first saw Banks crossing a Hollywood street. It was 1975, and Bobby was fresh off his divorce from Barbara Cook, still reeling from the scandal of the Linda affair and dealing with his growing drug addiction. Regina, at just 19, represented innocence and a chance for Bobby to reinvent himself. On December 31, 1975, Womack married his third wife, 19-year-old Regina Banks. Womack was 32, and Banks was 19. The 13-year age gap, while not as extreme as his previous relationships, still represented a significant power imbalance. Regina was barely out of her teens, while Bobby was an established star with decades of experience manipulating women. Initially, the relationship seemed different. On why she married the R&B icon, Banks is revealed that her new husband was different from the other guys he dated. She said Womack never rushed her at anything. He was also sincere and generous. But Bobby's pattern of toxic behavior soon emerged. His drug addiction was escalating, and with it came the paranoia, erratic behavior, and emotional volatility that would define their marriage. Together, they had 3 children, Bobby Truth, Truth Bobby, and daughter Gina Ray. But even parenthood couldn't stabilize Bobby's destructive tendencies. Truth Bobby, whose name was suggested by Womack's friend Sly Stone, died aged 4 months old after falling into a coma when he was found wedged between the wall and the bed. The death of their infant son sent Bobby deeper into drug addiction and emotional instability. In the early 1990s, Regina left him and went to New York, finally escaping a relationship that had consumed nearly 2 decades of her life. She had entered the marriage as a teenager full of hope and left as a middle-aged woman damaged by years of living with Bobby's addiction, infidelity, and emotional chaos. The most telling aspect of their relationship is what happened next. They later remarried in 2013, when Bobby was dying and battling Alzheimer's disease.
The American soul singer and songwriter Bobby Womack has died at the age of 70. Womack's career spanned more than 50 years, with hits including It's...
Regina gave him her youth, bore his children, endured his addictions and betrayals, and ultimately returned to nurse him through his final illness. Like Barbara and Linda before her, she paid an enormous price for loving Bobby Womack. But Bobby's destruction of women wasn't just limited to romantic relationships. His actions had created a ripple effect that would ultimately cost him everything, including the very family connections that had launched his career. After Bobby Womack's scandal with Linda, his life fell apart. The Cook family, who had once treated him like one of their own, completely severed ties with him. Any remaining goodwill he had was gone, and he found himself alone, ostracized, and facing the full consequences of his choices. The situation escalated when Barbara Cook's brother, Charles Cook Jr., decided to take matters into his own hands. In Chicago, he confronted Bobby in a violent attack that left him battered and bleeding. The once close connection between Womack and the Cook family had turned into outright hostility. To them, he was no longer just an in-law, he was an enemy.
I think he got 3 or 4 broken ribs, and his jaws broke, and his eyes were swollen up. You couldn't even see out of them, and Barbara was beaten up just as bad, but not as bad as Bobby.
The attack was more than just a physical beating. It was a clear message. Bobby Womack was no longer welcome in the world that Sam Cooke had brought him into. He had betrayed the trust of the family, and they wanted nothing more to do with him. This turning point marked the beginning of Womack's downward spiral. His personal life, already riddled with controversy, became an unbearable mess. The backlash he faced both publicly and privately weighed on him heavily. His reputation in the music industry took a massive hit, and with fewer allies by his side, he started looking for ways to escape. One of the ways he coped was through drugs. Like many artists in the industry, he turned to substances to numb the pain. But for him, it wasn't just a bad habit. It became a crutch. His struggles with addiction took hold of his life, affecting his music, relationships, and mental state. In interviews later in life, Womack would admit to being in a dark place during this time. The weight of his mistakes, the loss of the people he once considered family, and the violence he endured left scars that wouldn't heal easily. While he continued making music, his personal demons followed him, making it difficult to find stability. But drugs weren't the only thing pulling him down. His bad decisions continued to haunt him, leading to further failed relationships and professional struggles. His talent remained undeniable, yet the industry viewed him with skepticism. It wasn't just about his music anymore. It was about his reputation, and for many, that was too tarnished to ignore. By the late 1970s, Bobby Womack's life was unraveling fast. The soulful, passionate artist who had once been on top of the world was now in the grips of something far more powerful than fame: addiction. What started as a casual indulgence soon turned into a full-blown dependency on and it took over every part of his life.
It's an upper. I want a downer. So I was scared to mess with that because you do that with a neo.
In his memoir, Midnight Mover, Womack admitted that he had spent millions of dollars on drugs. At the height of his addiction, the money that had once flowed effortlessly from his music was now disappearing as fast as he could earn it. Coke wasn't just a habit, it became his escape, his way of coping with the pain, regret, and betrayals that haunted him. The drug didn't just drain his bank account, it changed him. Womack's paranoia intensified and he became unpredictable, lashing out at those around him. Friends who had stood by his side for years slowly began to distance themselves, unwilling or unable to handle the person he was becoming. His relationships became volatile, and his career, once built on talent and charisma, began to crumble under the weight of his addiction.
Be short-lived.
When I met her, I was doing drugs. And I was telling her, why don't you try this? And she said, no, that's it. It's an upper.
Womack's struggles with cocaine weren't just personal, they played out in public. His erratic behavior and troubling outbursts became well known in the industry. He wasn't just losing opportunities, he was losing respect. People who once admired his genius were now wary of working with him. Promoters, musicians, and record executives saw him as a liability rather than an asset. The paranoia was one of the worst effects of his addiction. He started believing that people were out to get him, that even those closest to him had ulterior motives. This constant fear and suspicion made it impossible for him to maintain relationships both personal and professional. His once legendary charm was now overshadowed by his outbursts and erratic decisions. Financially, things were just as disastrous. His addiction drained his resources, and with fewer people willing to work with him, making money became a struggle. The millions he had earned from hit records and sold-out tours were slipping through his fingers. Despite his talent, addiction had robbed him of the discipline and focus he once had. At his lowest point, Womack had lost nearly everything: his friends, his career, and even himself. The industry that had once embraced him had moved on. Bobby Womack's life had been marked by extraordinary talent, but also unimaginable tragedy. For those who believe in fate or even curses, his story seems almost too painful to be random. Loss followed him throughout his life, taking his loved ones in ways that left deep scars. One of the most devastating blows came with the death of his infant son, Truth Bobby. The child was only 4 months old when he passed away, leaving Womack shattered. Losing a child is an unimaginable pain for any parent. But for Womack, it was just the beginning of a series of heartbreaking losses that would shape the rest of his life. Years later, tragedy struck again. His firstborn son, Vincent, took his own life at just 21 years old. For Womack, it was yet another wound that never fully healed. He spoke about it with deep sorrow, questioning what could have driven his son to such despair. He carried that weight with him for the rest of his life, wondering if there was something he could have done differently. But the heartbreak didn't stop there. In 1974, Womack's brother, Harry Womack, was killed in a violent and shocking manner. Stabbed to death by his girlfriend during an argument, his death was yet another brutal loss for Bobby. Harry wasn't just his brother, he was a close companion, someone who had been with him through the ups and downs of the music industry. Losing him in such a tragic way was another devastating chapter in Bobby Womack's painful journey.
He's like a bottle in water. Oh, Harry, just afloat.
These weren't just distant losses. Each death took a toll on Womack's spirit, affecting his music, his relationships, and his own mental health. He often spoke about how much pain he carried, admitting that at times he wondered if he was next. It was as if death followed him, always lurking in the background, ready to take another loved one away. Some people saw these tragedies as coincidences, just the unfortunate reality of life. Others couldn't help but wonder if something deeper was at play. Was Womack's family cursed? Was there some dark cloud hanging over him, ensuring that loss was never too far away? Regardless of what one believes, the pain Womack endured was very real. Despite his success in music, he was a man who had been through more than most could imagine. Each time he got back up, another tragedy knocked him down again. Yet, through it all, he continued to make music, pouring his grief into his art. But with so much loss weighing on him, it became harder to escape the darkness. Despite being one of the most successful soul artists of his time, Bobby Womack's later years were filled with financial troubles, legal battles, and health struggles that left him almost unrecognizable from the superstar he once was. For an artist who had written for legends like the Rolling Stones and influenced generations of musicians, it seems unthinkable that he would end up in financial ruin. But that's exactly what happened. Over the years, Womack found himself in constant legal fights over songwriting credits and unpaid royalties. His music was making money, but somehow he wasn't seeing much of it. This wasn't a new story in the music industry. Many artists, especially black musicians of Womack's era, found themselves cheated out of the earnings they rightfully deserved. Contracts were complicated, deals were shady, and if an artist wasn't careful, they could wake up one day to find that the rights to their own songs had been taken from them. Womack was no exception. Despite writing and performing hit after hit, he often struggled just to stay financially stable. On top of the money problems, Womack's health also began to fail. By 2013, He had been diagnosed with early signs of Alzheimer's disease.
Then in early 2013, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The singer was saddened by the diagnosis, reportedly saying, "How can I not remember the songs that I wrote?"
This was devastating for a man whose career depended on his ability to remember lyrics, melodies, and the very essence of his music. He spoke openly about the struggles he faced, admitting that he was starting to forget things. But even as his memory faded, the music never left him. He continued performing as long as he could, pushing through the pain and confusion, because in many ways, music was all he had left. His later years were a heartbreaking contrast to the vibrant, confident artist he had once been. The man who had once played alongside Sam Cooke and inspired the Rolling Stones was now fighting to hold on to his legacy, both financially and mentally. Bobby Womack's story is one of incredible highs and devastating lows. He had talent, influence, and a place in music history, but the industry wasn't kind to him in the end. He was betrayed by the very system he had helped shape, and when he needed support the most, it wasn't there. Bobby Womack spent his final years trying to reclaim his place in the music world. Despite the setbacks he had faced, failed relationships, industry betrayals, and personal struggles, he never lost his love for music. Even as his health declined, he pushed himself to perform, write, and record. In 2012, he released The Bravest Man in the Universe, his first album in nearly 2 decades.
The bravest man.
It was met with critical acclaim, proving that his voice and songwriting skills were still as powerful as ever. The album was deeply personal, reflecting on his past mistakes, regrets, and the wisdom he had gained over the years. But while his music remained strong, his health was another story. He battled a series of illnesses, including pneumonia, diabetes, and colon cancer. Then came the devastating news. He was showing early signs of Alzheimer's. The disease slowly took its toll, making it harder for him to perform and remember the lyrics to the songs he had written. Despite everything, Womack remained reflective and hopeful. In one of his final interviews, he admitted to his mistakes but emphasized that music was his true love. His words carried the weight of a man who had lived through triumph and tragedy, a man who had given everything to his craft. But when he died in 2014 at the age of 70, he left behind a complicated legacy, one filled with controversy, tragedy, and unanswered questions. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.